Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of Meezan lecture series. We are resuming this series after a break in the month of Ramadan. If you recall, we had started to study one of uh, the initial chapters of Meezan, which form its preamble. So one of the preambles relates to the fundamental principles of understanding the Quran and the Sunnah, and also it states the sources of religion and how to comprehend them. So we had studied the principles of understanding the Quran, and I'm just going to show these 10 principles that we will be studying, and in fact we have completed until the sixth principle and until the seventh principle, in fact. And so I'm sorry, it's under the eighth principle. So we finished the first eight principles. You can see that being them being displayed before you. Appreciation of classical Arabic, eloquence of language, uniqueness of style, final authority, parallel verses and constructions, final book on religion, a chronicle of Muhammad's inzar, coherence in the discourse. So we had finished until these first eight principles, and now we will be finishing off the principles of understanding the Quran by studying the last two principles, arrangement of the Quran and the historical background of the Quran. Needless to say that these principles are of utmost importance to understand the Quran. They are like a lighthouse of guidance to the advanced learner of the Quran. They would educate him and guide them how they can understand the verses of the Quran, its nuances, its very special styles, at the same time, how it has been steeped in classical Arabic, some of the features of classical Arabic, and at the same time, how the whole content of the Quran leads to a very grand finale in the second chapter of the Quran, which of course is the topic today. So we'll start off today with this eighth or the ninth principle, which is called the arrangement of the Quran. And as far as this arrangement is concerned, the first and foremost thing that we have to understand is that, contrary to the general perception, not only of many Muslim scholars, but I would say many Western scholars also, that the Quran is actually a very well arranged book. It's not a haphazard collection of book. It's not that it was collected in the times of Caliph Usman and then arranged according to his own understanding. Not only that, as far as the verses within a surah of the Quran is concerned, they are also very aptly arranged. They have a very meaningful sequence, and in fact, this sequence actually makes the whole surah to be a meaningful whole in which it has a theme, it has a progression of topics, and then it reaches a final conclusion. So, as far as the Quran is concerned, the most important thing to realize from its structure is that it is actually composed of seven chapters, seven distinct chapters, and in each of these chapters, the surahs, they occur in pairs. And this paired relationship between the surahs is found almost all in all the chapters. And yes, there are some exceptions to this paired phenomena, but these exceptions, of course, are easily explained and are also easily discernible. This paired theme of the Quran in seven chapters is actually alluded to by a Quranic verse, Surah Hijr, verse 87. It says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ سَبْعًا مِنَ الْمَثَانِي وَالْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمِ. And we have bestowed upon you seven mathani, which is the great Quran. So the word mathani actually is the plural of the word masna, and masna means something which occur in pairs, something which occur in pairs. So, in effect, what the verse is telling us is that God has given us seven things composed of pairs. Of course, referring to the fact that these are seven chapters, and in each of these chapters, the surahs occur in pairs. The first person to point out this chapterization of the Quran, these seven chapters, and how these surahs have been arranged in pairs is Ustaz Amin Yasir Islahi, who passed away more than 2 decades ago. And he, in fact, was the person who laid the foundations of this understanding of the Quran, and then thereafter it has been developed by his student, Ustaz Javed Ghamidi, and you can see and compare and contrast how both these outstanding Quranic scholars have understood this chapterization of the Quran, and how the original contribution in this regard actually opens the doors to wonderful facets of knowledge in which we are able to understand the depth of the Quran, and we really marvel and relish that this could not have been, this cannot be a human endeavor. It has to be something beyond, well beyond human production or authorship. So, as far as these 7 chapters are concerned, uh, we have to first of all understand that each chapter begins with one or more than one Meccan surah and ends on one or more than one Medinan surah. So the first feature of every chapter is that the Meccan and Medinan surahs are arranged chronologically, which means the Meccan surahs, they always occur first, and then occur the Medinan surahs. And within each chapter, all the surahs are historically arranged. So it's not that the chapters are historically arranged, but within a chapter, every surah is historically arranged, which actually means that the surah which is placed first was also revealed first, and so on and so forth. So, as far as this chapterization is concerned, you can see this being displayed before you. Chapter number 1 consists of Surah Fatiha. It starts off with Surah Fatiha and ends on the 5th Surah, Surah Maida. The Meccan surahs, of course, just one Meccan surah, which is Surah Fatiha, the first surah, and the next 4 are Medinan surahs. Chapter number 2 starts off with Surah Anam and it ends on Surah Tawbah, the 9th surah. The first 2 surahs are Meccan and the last 2 surahs are Medinan. And then we have chapters 3, 4, and 5, the arrangement being displayed before you. So the chapter number 3 begins with Surah Yunus and ends on Surah Nur, with the first 14 surahs being Meccan and the 15th one, which is Surah Nur, it's a Medinan surah. Chapter number 4 starts off with Surah Furqan, ends with Surah Ahzab, and you can see that from 25, Surah number 25 to Surah number 32, the surahs are Meccan, and the 33rd surah, which is Surah Ahzab, it is the Medinan surah. Chapter number 5 starts off with Surah Sabah, ends on Surah Hujurat, and you can see the Meccan surahs are from 34 to 46, and Medinan are from 47 to 49. Chapter number 6 starts off with Surah Qaf, the 50th surah, and ends on Surah Tahrim, the 66th surah. So from 50 to 56, we have Meccan surahs, and from 57 to 66, we have Medinan surahs. The last chapter is chapter number 7. It starts off with Surah Mulk, ends on Surah Nas. So it only has the last 2 surahs, which are Surah Falak and Nas, to be the Medinan ones, and all the rest are Meccan surahs. So the important thing to realize is that this chapterization actually arranges the Quran in a wonderful sequence, and one really marvels at how the Almighty has arranged these surahs in a way that they reach a certain culmination. So within each chapter, you'll find there is a theme of every chapter. Similarly, within a surah, you'll find that there is a theme in every surah. So the themes of a surah, they make up the theme of a chapter. And also important to understand is that the depiction of the phases of the Prophet's missionary, his mission, they have been depicted in each of these chapters. And we know the Meccan surahs depict his Meccan phases at times, and similarly with the Medinan ones, they depict the Medinan phases. So the Meccan phases, of course, they are ones in which the Prophet started off his ministry by warning his nation of an imminent danger if they don't accept the verdict of God. And of course, that is not something that was forced upon them. It was something that was argued with them, it was reasoned out with them, and they understood it, and they accepted that yes, it is something which is absolutely true, but out of arrogance or some other reason, some of them ended up denying it. Otherwise, this reasoning and persuasion was the method in which the whole content of the Quran was delivered, and in the Meccan surahs, until the time came when the truth had become unfolded to the extent that the addressees had absolutely no excuse except perhaps stubbornness to deny. So we find that after this, the Prophet shifted to Medina, and here he actually delivered the truth to the Jews and the Christians, the people of the book who were found in Medina. And of course, some of the idolaters, the Bani Ishmael, they also resided in Medina, like the Aus and the Khazraj. They were, of course, from the Bani Ishmael, and upon them too, the truth was delivered. And until passing through various phases, it was decided that once the truth has been unveiled to all the denominations which were present in Arabia before the Prophet, they will be facing the verdict of God. And this verdict of God was actually something that was delivered in the 2nd chapter of the Quran. So If we look at the Quran, you'll find that the grand finale in the Quran, or the pinnacle in the Quran, reaches in the second chapter. We'll just be discussing something more about it. But just to give you this idea that normally as human beings, we when we write books and when we create the discourses, normally the climax occurs right at the end, or the anticlimax. But in this case, it is a very different and a unique experience that an advanced reader of the Quran will go through, because in this case, you'll find that it is not near the end of the Quran you'll find any climax occurring. In fact, the climax occurs in chapter number 2, and this has a very special sequence and reason, which we will be discussing in a while as well. But now I would like to point out the fact that each of these chapters also have themes. And the themes that have been pointed out by Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi regarding these chapters, I'm just going to go through them in a brief way so that you can have idea of how these themes they emerge from every chapter. The theme of the first chapter is to communicate the truth to the Jews and the Christians to the extent that they are left with no excuse to deny it, to institute a new ummah from among the Ishmaelites, its spiritual purification and isolation from the disbelievers, and a description of its final covenant with the Almighty. So, although a longish statement, but this is how Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has described the theme of the first chapter. And as we have just discussed, this first chapter of the Quran starts off with Surah Fatiha, ends on Surah Ma'idah, and except for the first surah, which is Surah Fatiha, the rest of the four surahs, Surah Baqarah, Surah Al Imran, Surah Nisa, and Surah Ma'idah, they are Medinan surahs. And it is here that we find in the Medinan surahs that the people of the book are discussed extensively, and they're reminded of the covenant that they made regarding the last prophet, that they would welcome them. His prophecies were found in their own books, but when he actually came, most of them ended up denying the prophet that they were actually waiting for. Ustaz Ghamidi says that the theme of the second chapter is to communicate the truth to the polytheists of Arabia to the extent that they are left with no excuse to deny it, spiritual purification of the believers and their isolation from the disbelievers, and a description of the final worldly judgment of God. And then he says that the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth chapters have the same theme. And what is that? Delivering warning and glad tidings and spiritual purification of the believers and their isolation from the disbelievers. So this is the common theme of the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth chapters. He then says the theme of the seventh chapter is to warn the leadership of the Quraysh of the consequences of the hereafter, to communicate the truth to them to the extent that they are left with no excuse to deny it, and as a result to warn them of a severe punishment, and to give glad tidings to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam of the dominance of the religion in the Arabian Peninsula. Briefly, this can be stated as delivering warning and glad tidings. So you can see, viewers, how this culmination reaches in the second chapter of the Quran, and as far as this culmination is concerned, it actually is something in which the verdict is delivered against the addressees of the prophets and how they shall be treated if they continue to deny the last prophet of God, which, of course, in the case of the Jews and Christians, they were being weighted. You can see this small illustration depicting how the chapters reach their culmination on chapter number 2. So in chapter number 1, you'll find the people of the book being addressed, and from chapters number 7, 6, 5, 3, and 2, basically the addressees are the idolaters of Bani Ismail. And of course, in the Medinan surahs, we do find the hypocrites also being addressed, and an element of address regarding the believers. And of course, some of the directives that were given to them, they are also mentioned. So this is a very, I would say, precise description of the contents of the Quran with vis-a-vis the climax it actually reaches. So you may just see it once again, that this chapter number 2 is the one in which this verdict is delivered in the last surah of this chapter. So remember, there are 4 surahs in chapter number 2: Surah Araf, Surah Anfal, Surah Anam, Surah Araf, Surah Anfal, and Surah Tawbah. So Surah Tawbah is the 9th surah, and in this surah you'll find the verdict being delivered regarding the addressees of the Prophet. So as far as these details are concerned, you can clearly see that the arrangement of the Quran is such that it is from the point of view of the arrangement of the Quran, something that tells us that the Quran reaches its culmination in a very special style, and this rather skewed style is such that we have to understand that each of these chapters have a very specific import. They have a very specific meaning, and at the same time, each of these chapters have the same importance that will always be individually understood, and at the same time, we have to look them up as a complete whole. Now, if the first chapter is not taken into consideration, the sequence of the groups is from the end to the beginning. So once again, I'll refer you to the chart that is being displayed before you just now. So if you look at this chart, you'll find that the sequence of the chapters is from the end to the beginning, from the 7th, 6th, 5th, 4th, and the 3rd chapter. And the 7th chapter ends on delivering warning and glad tidings. So after that, in the 6th, 5th, 4th, and 3rd chapters, besides the theme of delivering warning and glad tidings, the theme of spiritual purification of the believers and their isolation from the disbelievers is also added. So remember, the 7th chapter is something that delivers warning and glad tidings. And after that, 6th, 5th, 4th, and 3rd chapters, besides this theme of delivering warnings and glad tidings, it adds the theme of spiritual purification. And as we've just seen that the 2nd chapter is the culmination of the chapters, so it is here that the warning, or in technical terms, the inzar of the Prophet reaches its culmination. So besides the themes of warning and delivering glad tidings and the spiritual purification of the believers and their isolation from the disbelievers, the worldly judgment of God is also depicted, which is also like a miniature day of judgment that will take place before the actual day of judgment. Now, the first chapter specifically addresses the people of the book. The first chapter, the whole of the first chapter, specifically addresses the people of the book instead of the polytheists of Arabia. And in this respect, it differs from the rest, because the first chapter is solely devoted to the people of the book, right from Surah Fatiha up to Surah Maida, the last surah. But it also relates to the worldly judgment pronounced in the 2nd chapter in Surah Tawbah in the very manner the rest of the groups relate to it. So the 2nd chapter, as we can see, is the chapter in which these various phases, they reach their culmination, and the only difference is regarding the addressees. So this is evident from this, that from 2nd to the 7th chapter, a descending order arrangement has been adopted in order to relate this arrangement with the first chapter. And the first chapter has been placed the foremost because the recipients of the Quran are its addressees the foremost. And except for the first chapter, the Meccan surahs of each chapter discuss delivering of warning and glad tidings and of communicating the truth to its ultimate extent, while the Medinan surahs discuss the spiritual purification and isolation of the believers. But both the Meccan and Medinan surahs are in harmony and in consonance with one another in each of these chapters, and they relate to one another in a manner like a stem is related to its root. And so therefore, this is such a scientific arrangement that if we deliberate on this arrangement at length, we can see that how every chapter is well knit, and within each chapter, all these surahs are also so well knit that it's unmistakably something that can only be a divine production, and something which is well beyond any human production or authorship. So I'm now going to briefly go through the last of these principles, and which is called historical background. So as far as the historical background is concerned, we have to understand that this historical background must be considered for, it has to be taken into account by all advanced students, because you see, the Quran has a very, very, very specific and a very, very peculiar background. It was revealed to Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century in Arabia, and it is evident from this history that Prophet Muhammad explained the Quran wherever and whenever a need arose, and so did the scholars among the companions and the scholars and researchers after them. This history of the Quran is an established fact and demands something that we have to understand. And the way it has been articulated by Ustaz Ghamidi, I'm just going to read out some of the things that he has said, that if we understand that there is a historical background of the Quran, and in this historical background, of course, we know the Prophet uh, had a very strong history. Of course, it was started off with Prophet Abraham, who settled his progeny. Ishmael, the eldest son, was settled in Hijaz, and the younger son, Isaac, was settled in the land of Canaan or in Palestine. And so these two centers were basically chosen as centers of monotheism by the Almighty. And Prophet Ishmael, he of course grew up in the land of Arabia, and the responsibility of delivering the truth was first given to Prophet Isaac's nation or his descendants, who are called the Israelites. And this went on for a very long time in history. Right after Prophet Abraham, we know that the descendants that were chosen for this purpose were from the branch of Isaac. And this went on right up to the Prophet Jesus. And until that time, it was the Israelites to whom this responsibility of delivering the truth was entrusted. And once they ended up denying Prophet Jesus, not only denying him, but they also went after killing him or trying to crucify him, although they did not succeed. But when matters reached this extent, then the responsibility of delivering the truth was taken away from them and transferred to the Ishmaelites. So the Quran basically covers all this extensive history in very precise words, and it reflects this tremendous brevity that has become a hallmark of the content of the Quran. So in lieu of this, Ustaz Ghamidi has written three important conclusions that must be always referred to whenever we read the Quran and understand its historical sequence and historical background. So he writes, firstly, the word he, of course, refers to an advanced learner or to a student of the Quran. It says, firstly, he must be well aware of the history of the period and place in which the Quran was revealed. Every student of the Quran knows that it mentions the destruction of previous Arab nations like the Ad, the Thamud, and the people of the Madian. The views held by these peoples are alluded to by the Quran. It also mentions the preaching of their respective prophets and the way these people reacted to it. Also depicted in the Quran is the arrival of Abraham into Arabia, the sacrifice of his son Ishmael, and the construction of the Baytullah. The Quran also refers to the influence of Abraham and Ishmael on the cultural, moral, social, and economic conditions of Arabia. Also portrayed in the Quran are the alterations done by the Quraysh in the religion constituted by Abraham and Ishmael, and the way they transformed the Baytullah, the center of monotheism, into a center of idol worship, and the religious innovations and rituals which, as a result of this, made way into their religion. Similarly discussed in the Quran are the circumstances in which the Quran was revealed, the incidents which took place at that time, as well as the political and religious views which were in vogue at that time. In order to understand all this, it is essential that the available history of that period be fully benefited from while keeping it subservient to the words of the Quran and its coherence. Through this, many aspects which the Quran refers to can be understood better, and it is also helpful in unfolding many complexities of the Quran. So you see, the first of these important conclusions that have been drawn is that because of this extensive coverage of the history of the prophets of God, specifically starting, of course, from Adam, but then as these practices crystallize, as the edicts of religion, they became prominent. We know that in the second period of history, the prophethood that the Almighty Himself had instituted, the institution of prophethood, it took a new turn when Prophet Abraham's family was chosen for this purpose. And individually before them, we know prophets of God, they came to various territories, to various areas, and they had their individual missions being set up for them. But once Abraham was born, we know that he migrated all the way from Iraq and Ur, a city in Mesopotamia. Then he came over to settle his progeny in some 2,000 years before Christ, and we know that this is something that went on for a very, very long period of time. And as far as this history and historical background is concerned, if we are aware of the historical background, especially by reading the Old Testament and some of the historical data that we have available in other repositories, it will be of extreme benefit to us. Now, the second point which Ustaz Ghamidi has written also needs to be understood. So he says, secondly, full importance should be given to whatever is mentioned in our hadith and athar literature with reference to the Prophet and his companions. No doubt they may contain many spurious things, and since the original words have not always been preserved, and a narrator has relied on his own intellect to transmit these words, a lot of changes have come about in their original words. Yet this literature still contains many valuable gems. So, viewers, as far as history is concerned, not only we find this history being contained in other repositories, but one of the very important receptacles of this history is the hadith and asar literature that has been available, that is made available, it is still found today. And as Ustaz has pointed out, that there are many spurious things, they contain many spurious things, but then other than that, they still contain many gems, many, I would say, treasures of knowledge still are found in our hadith and asar literature. Of course, when we understand them, they can in no way alter the Quran, they can in no way overrule the Quran, they can in no way dominate the Quran in any sense. They have to be understood as subservient to the Quran. And when we do that, we find that there are many historical details which are furnished by these ahadith and athar. Thus, for example, the Battle of Badr, we know, and the migration itself. Then we had various other battles being fought before that in the Meccan period, how the Quraysh behave with the Prophet. So all these details have been preserved to some extent in the hadith and athar literature. And as such, these are very rich details. This richness is something that has to be benefited from by every advanced learner of the Quran. And as Ustaz has warned us that this must not in any way be done in order to, have the Quranic text in any way the hadith text prevailing over the Quranic text in any way. So the Quranic text must always be remain in dominance and not in subservience to hadith literature. The third thing that Ustaz Ghamidi has mentioned also needs to be read. And so he said, whatever scholars and exegetes have written down must be given due consideration. It is only by benefiting from the words of previous scholars that new dimensions are added in such disciplines. This cannot be done by ignoring them. True knowledge does not come through arrogance and haughtiness. It comes with humility and a sincere love for the truth. Thus, it is essential that students of the Quran must always study the primary exegetical works on the Quran when they are forming an opinion or deliberating on and teaching a verse. Prior to the leading scholars of the Farai school who have worked on Quranic exegesis, three primary works on the exegesis of the Quran can be identified. The first of them is Jami al-Bayan of Ibn Jarir Tabari. The second is At-Tafsir al-Kabir of Imam Razi. The third is Al-Kashaf of Zamakhshari. The first of these is a compendium of the opinions of authorities of the past. The second mostly deals with theological issues, and the third with declensions and syntax. From among these primary works, though a student of the Quran should only take what is in harmony with the words of the Quran and its coherence and arrangement, however, he should never ignore these works. So again, something very valuable that we have to fully take benefit from and fully understand, of course, are the tafsir literature, is the tafsir literature that precedes the works of the Farai scholars. Of course, the Farai scholars themselves have written tafsirs in their own right. Needless to say that they have to be consulted, but before them, three very important figures, of course, are to be consulted, and they being Ustaz Ibn Jarir Tabari. So his work, as we all know, has been summarized a few centuries later by a very prominent authority, Hafiz Ibn Kathir. So if a person is not able to fully consult Ibn Jarir Tabari because of the voluminous content of this tafsir, he can always refer to its summary in the form of Tafsir Ibn Kathir. As far as Tafsir Kabir of Imam Razi is concerned, it is a compendium of theological issues of his own times, and it also summarizes many such debates that went on in those times. And finally, we have the Tafsir of Kashaf, in which the language of the Quran, especially its syntax, its declension, the Arab, they are all discussed in detail, and not only discussed in detail, but at the same time, we also find complex grammatical constructions being broken down by Zamakhshari with nonchalant ease, and at the same time pointing this out to students of the Quran that they must stick to the text of the Quran in order to understand it. So this is the historical background which Ustaz Ghamidi has delineated and has made his point that we cannot understand the Quran without actually, I mean, of course, the Quran can be understood without it, but there are certain sources which really help us in extending our knowledge, in expanding our horizons, and from this we can gauge that as far as the history of that period is concerned, wherever we find it, we have to be well versed with it, especially people who would like to understand the Quran in its depth, also hadith and athar literature, and finally what scholars have done regarding understanding the Quran. We should not ignore it, but we must always consult it as individuals who stand in line with the heritage of the past regarding Islamic understanding. So this brings us to an end to these principles of understanding the Quran that we have covered extensively in the last many sessions. Inshallah, in our next session, we'll start off with the principles of understanding the Sunnah, or in fact, the determinants of the Sunnah, because of course the Sunnah has to be determined first. But just to give you this overview, that these 10 principles, basically, they form the foundation in which we have to understand, or on which the understanding of the Quran is based. And these foundational principles are indispensable. They have to be dealt with in a lot of with a lot of not only comprehensive understanding the way the things are mentioned here, but in a way that we are able to make full sense of them by referring to how the Quran has been arranged, something that we have just discussed today, that the layout of the Quran, the structure of the Quran, its background, and the way the surahs have been arranged in it. They also form a very indispensable point regarding the understanding of the Quran, and they give, in fact, allow me to say that they bring the Quran before the reader in a new light, in an absolutely new light, and in a very profound way. And it's just a question of experiencing it. And inshallah, we will be doing this, and we are still doing it, as you all know, in our other sessions which relate to the textual study of the Quran. In this textual study, the precise reason for undertaking the study is that we are able to understand how the structural coherence of the Quran brings us to so many new pearls of wisdom of the Quran, and how we can really benefit from them. So now we can turn to our Q&A session today, and please, if you have any questions regarding what we have just studied, you have the time to raise them.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Saleem. Assalamualaikum, everyone. So we are ready to take your questions now. Dr. Saleem, I have a question. I remember we started studying, doing the textual study of the Quran. You mentioned there were 7 characters that in the Quran, if I remember correctly. Could you remind us what those characters were, Dr. Saleem?
So we had actually discussed this, that as far as the Quran is concerned, it's basically a book of dialogue, a conversation between living entities of 7th century Arabia. And these entities are, of course, God being the narrator of this dialogue. Of course, he's the real narrator, he's the author, and in his authorship, the way the Jews, the Christians, the people of the book, of course, they are called the people of the book, the hypocrites, the idolaters on the one hand. So these are the addressees of Prophet Muhammad. Then the believers, the Prophet himself, and Gabriel. So I don't know whether they come up to 7 or not, but these are the important characters which actually engage in this conversation. We also have monologues, and we also have dialogues in which this goes like a back and forth between these characters. And it is in our well-being of understanding the Quran that we know that it is a dialogue between these living entities, and of course it will relate a lot to these living entities, and a lot of things that are mentioned in the Quran in a certain way, they relate to these foremost addressees. And of course, when they relate to the later generations, then they relate to them in the form of principles, and of course in the form of certain understandings that can be analogously extended to later periods.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Saleem. Salman Aziz, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
In one of the previous sessions, sir, am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
We discussed that Ghamidi Saab said that to the West, the coherence was introduced by Muslim Saleem Saab in his
Yes,
PhD thesis problem. So I asked you, but you said that the Western scholar didn't accept it, saying that it's probably we are trying to maybe bending it or trying to impose it to make it both the ends look equal or
right.
maybe more plausible or logical. So, do we have any other logic to counter those arguments by the Western scholars that we are not trying to impose it or trying to make it equal? It is there logically.
You see, the most important thing that has been missed in this whole, I would say, understanding of the Quran is that it's a literary masterpiece. It's a book of, it's a book that has to be or can be understood by people who have an appreciation of the linguistic style, people who have knowledge of the literary aspects of any discourse. So people who are not literary mean that they don't have any taste of literature. It always becomes difficult for them to understand the Quran. And to me, I see this in some scholarship in the West, that it's not that they are bereft of the literary understanding. It is only in that the people who have tried to understand the Quran uh, from the standpoint of the Quran itself, they have fallen well short of its literary nuance or its literary, I would say, grandeur. And they have more fallen prey, I would say, to the understanding of the Quran, the way it has been presented by Muslim academia, in the sense that they would like to pursue the Quran, understand the Quran from the Hadith literature itself. And because they see that the Muslim scholarship, the dominant current in Muslim scholarship basically is understanding the Quran through Hadith literature. So you find that the people who have become famous in their understanding in the Quran are also the ones who have taken the same course. And it's not, you'll find many scholars of the West who have written uh, an explanation of the Quran. You'll find very few tafsirs written by the Western scholars. All that they do is normally understand individual passages of the Quran. And because of the fact that they are not fully aware of how the Quran is a book of dialogue, how things go back and forth, how the Almighty standing, I mean, like a divine orator himself, he addresses multiple groups by first taking up one group and then taking up another group, and it's like going from right to left and taking all these addresses one by one. So because of the fact that this fundamental aspect of the Quran, that it's a book of dialogue in which this dialogue takes place between entities which were found in 7th century Arabia, has remained in the dark, not only for the Western scholarship, but of course for a very large part of the Muslim scholarship also, that it has become difficult to understand the Quran. And invariably, even Muslim scholars who are trying to do so, regardless of hadith, and if they've tried to come directly to the text of the Quran, what has happened is that they have come to this conclusion more often than not that they cannot make sense of certain uh, divergences in the Quran, certain arrangements of the Quran, and they virtually give up. So I think that it's not by understanding the genre of the Quran that all this has resulted, not only amongst Western scholars, but as I said, they are less to blame, because I mean they are generally towing the line of the Muslim scholars themselves. And because a vast majority of these Muslim scholars, as I said, not giving this importance, that basically it's not a book the way we think that books should be arranged, and that we've not got to the bottom of the style of the Quran that this has resulted. So just to summarize this longish explanation, I would say that I would not say it's as much as their fault as is the fault of our own understanding as people who stand within the Muslim tradition.
So, what I mean to say is that the onus of responsibility of something that we have propounded is upon us. So we are saying that there is a model and it has some unequal side, that from this side the ascents, the surah ascend like this, and their basic theme is like this, and the left side is like this. So I think a Western scholar, I think, should be a clean slate and should be able to accept that. So if they are not accepting that, what my question was that what we have the logic to make them understand or make anybody understand that the coherence is something really discovered and it is maybe clear in the daylight if you have some logic on this.
So as I said, this is an on work in progress, and remember, this is not a very, I mean, it's not a very old in its inception. So maybe last 30 to 40 years are the ones that have been eventful, and so this is an ongoing project. I would say it's a work in progress in which this engagement is still going on. So there are certain areas in which I mean, the Farai strands, the strand of people is in touch with the Western literati. But as I said, it might take a little more time for them to understand this. And obviously, this also needs opportunities in which you can again engage with Western scholars. And these opportunities do arise at time. And whenever these opportunities arise, we do try to capitalize on them. But as you can see, that the need has to be there for them to come forward and discuss. I mean, I mean, it cannot be created. It's not something that we can drive down their throats. This is something that has to happen. So yes, there are opportunities in which at times you can be proactive and present these points that I've just mentioned before you, and I have gotten this chance as well. But as I said, that maybe it's going to take some more time. And at the moment, the Western scholarship is more occupied with the historical aspects of the Quran as a book that has to be understood as whether it's a divine word or not, and if it is a divine word, how much has it been preserved, and what part of that preservation is something that we can depend upon. And for this, they rely mostly on manuscript evidence. Anything else is totally ignored by them. So I suggest that that is something which is occupying them more at this instance, and especially with this discovery of the Birmingham part. I mean, the Birmingham leaves of the Quran, and some years ago, that has created a lot of interest in this Western scholarship and diverted many of them towards this historical quest, I would say. So let's see if we can find more opportunities to engage with them, and also think how we can best convey this whole rationale behind our understanding, and wait for these opportunities.
Thank you for that detailed answer, Dr. Saleem. The coherence of the Quran, do we have some literature that maybe you can share with me so I can share in the group maybe later on?
So we have tons of literature on the coherence of the Quran. Maybe not as much as in the English language as much we have it in the Urdu language, or maybe in Arabic as well. So in the English language, of course, the best way to understand this coherence is to study the tafsir of Ustaz Ghamidi and Ustaz Islahi, because it is a it is an application of these principles that has produced this tafsir. So the best explanation of coherence is, it's like saying that the proof of the pudding lies in its eating. So you just need to study these tafsirs in which the principles of coherence have been applied, and see for yourself how they stand the test of historical criticism.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saleem. Nadia, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. I wanted to ask you about Easter. So there are different views within Islamic sects about Easter. Some say that Hazrat Isa was, raised alive and then he will come back.
Right.
And then I think I also listened in your lecture was about that, as mentioned in Quran, Allah says that I will give you death and then I'll so I don't know which version is correct, because sometimes our Christian friends ask us like, you don't celebrate Easter, you believe in Jesus. So just to have more clarity as far as Quran is and Islam is
Yes.
concerned. Thank you.
So you see, we do believe in Jesus as Muslims because he's a prophet of God. We believe in his prophethood. But you see, as far as his death and resurrection is concerned, that is something that has been specifically discussed in the Quran, and therefore we will rely on the Quran regarding his last, the way he was, I mean, made to dwell on this earth and then taken away. So the Christians think that he was crucified on Friday, which is of course Good Friday as they call it, and the day before yesterday was a Good Friday for them, which means this was the day when he was crucified, and the third day on which he was raised is called Easter, and that is the time when he rose from the dead, and then the whole story starts again that he'll come back once again. So this is what Christians believe. But as far as the Quran is concerned, the Quran is very explicit, very adamant, and very unequivocal when it says that Jesus is not set to return. He died a natural death on this earth. He was never crucified. He was never killed, and he did what he was required to do, and he went away like other prophets of God, and he's not set to return. This is what the Quran has clearly stated. But unfortunately, there have been certain narratives of the Prophet which have been reported in a way that people think that he is set to return. So a vast majority of Muslims also believe, just as Christians do, that although they believe that he was crucified, I mean, they believe that they were crucified, but Muslims believe that he was not crucified. He was lifted to the heavens alive, and
Yes.
he's set to return. So this is what the majority belief of the Muslims and, of course, the belief of the Christians is. But my understanding and the understanding of the way I look at things is absolutely different, in which we find the Quran telling us that Jesus was given a natural death. He passed away, and he finished his business and his ministry in this world in his own times. He's not set to return. And so, I mean, uh, celebrating his crucifixion, or maybe celebrating his, not celebrating his crucifixion, but remembering him as a person who died on the cross, is something that is against the Quran, because that never happened. And of course, when that never happened, this could not have happened when he never died. How could he have risen from the dead? So these are just beliefs that have shaped Christendom and the way Christianity has progressed, and they are against the Quran. So when we say that we don't believe in Easter or we don't believe in Good Friday, it only means that the Quran explicitly says that he was neither crucified and nor raised to life. So he was given death the way all other prophets were, and that is the end of that.
Natural death. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Iraj, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Well,
Dr. Saab, I was watching your video regarding the interpretation of Surah Fil according to Ustad Farahi, in which you mentioned that the way he interpreted it, that it wasn't the birds that threw stones, it was Abdul Muttalib and his people who took refuge in the mountains, and they threw stones from there at Abraha and his army, right? But I mean, just a question. This verse, and he sent against them birds and flocks, and then the next verse says, striking them with stones of hard clay. They both come, I mean, the verses come one after the other. So automatically you do kind of, imagine that, okay, it was the birds, because it doesn't say that they they struck them with stones of hard clay, or he struck them with stones of hard clay. I mean, there's no mention of exactly who did it. So how can you explain how he came to this interpretation? And I mean, it with Allah anything is possible, right? So could it not have been the birds who threw stones?
I mean, as you have rightly said, with Allah, anything could have been possible. Had He wanted, the birds could have done it. Had He wanted, even a small insects could have done it. I mean, nothing is beyond God. But you see, He never chose this to happen. And the way that He has set his rules about is that human beings do their best, and then the help of God always arrives. I mean, how can it be possible that Abdul Muttalib and his family vacate the house of God and take refuge in the neighbor mountains, and let the house of God be attacked by Abraha? This is the same thing that the Quran has pointed out when Moses actually had asked his people to go and conquer the land of Palestine, enter it, and they said, "Fazhab anta wa rabbuka faqatila." You and your Lord go and fight. We are not going to go there, because there are very tall people there and strong people there, and if you go there, they're just going to kill us. So you see, the law of the Almighty is that when you have to do something that is your responsibility, then you should do it and wait for God's help. And the second important thing that has led to this conclusion is, if you read this surah, it says tarmihim bihijaratin. So tarmi means to throw, to pelt. I mean, you cannot imagine a bird throwing. Like, I mean, the word throw means that you actually, I mean, take back your arm and throw it like this. So it has to be like a vertical, like a horizontal action. For a bird, this horizontal action cannot take place. For that, the Arabic word, some different Arabic word should have been used, because you see, they are going to drop the stones. They're not going to hit the stones. I mean, they're not going to hit with the stone. They are always going to drop the stone, because they were carrying these stones in their beaks and in their claws. So some word like alka means to drop, should have been used. This was never used, and the Quranic Arabic is something which actually becomes the final word on such issues, that how can the birds be called that they threw stones, when the word throw actually means to throw something like this in a horizontal way. You don't throw it like, I mean, you don't, the birds cannot throw, they can just drop. So the word throw cannot be used by birds. They can, I mean, all that you can say is that they dropped those stones that they were carrying. So linguistically, this is not possible, because the word used by the Quran is Rama, and that is a horizontal throw. And lastly, the word tarmi actually is something that we have to also once again think, that the word tarmi is like the addressees, which were the Quraysh. They are being told that tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil, that you threw stones on them, because of the fact that the word tarmim in the Arabic language can be declined in a way that it can also be, it can also refer to its file or its subject to be the birds, because of the fact that Rama is found there. So that has caused the confusion, because they think that the birds have been mentioned immediately before, and the word tarmi is related to them. Whereas, as I said, the word tarmi is something that is related to the Quraysh, and this is because of the fact that the Quraysh did their best, and that was that they pelted stones from the nearby valley, and there was a huge storm that actually increased the velocity of those stones, and they then started to hit the elephants and the soldiers of the army of Abraha with a tremendous amount of force, and they caused them to die actually. So this is actually what happened. And besides this, these are very important, I would say, uh, proofs from the Quran. We also have Arab poets of those times telling us that all this happened, and there was a huge storm when Abraha's army came forward, and in that storm, there were these stones that they came from nowhere. Of course, they did not know where they came from, and it was not the topic of their poetry. But they have signaled out that it was a huge storm, and that storm actually caused those stones that were pelted to pick up tremendous speed and then strike the warring army. So this is a secondary evidence, I would say. But primarily, as I said, the law of God is that he helps those who first help themselves. And secondly, as I said, that linguistically the word Rama or Tarmi cannot be used for birds. It is absolutely non-collocative, as they say.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay,
Saleem. Javed Irfan, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम रहमतुल्लाहि।
वालेकुम सलाम।
कुरान में जैसे जिक्र हुआ था कि क्या कुरान के मुखातिब जिन भी रहे हैं, और अगर जिन में जो वो आया था कि तुम इंसानों और जिन्नों तो अपने रब की किन किन नेमतों को झुटलाओगे, तो क्या कुरान का पैगाम जिन्नों के लिए भी है?
देखिए, कुरान मजीद का जो बराह रास्त पैगाम है वो तो इंसानों के लिए है, लेकिन ये ऐसे ही है कि बाज़ दफ़ा जिन मुखातिब हो जाते हैं बाज़ यूनिवर्सल ट्रूथ्स के लिए। लेकिन हम ये नहीं कह सकते कि ये किताब बराह रास्त उन्हीं के लिए आई थी। ऐसे ही है कि जैसे जब जिन्होंने भी कुरान सुना तो उन्होंने कहा कि जैसे सूरह अहकाफ में आता है कि वो ईमान ले आए, उन्होंने कहा कि हमने हज़रत मूसा की किताब के बाद एक मरतबा फिर एक किताब सुनी है जो अल्लाह की तरफ से आई है। तो ये ऐसे ही
जी
है कि जैसे वो जब उन्होंने एक चीज़ को सुन लिया, और वो सुनने वाली जो चीज़ है अगर वो ऐसी बात कर रही है जो एक यूनिवर्सली ट्रूथ चीज़ है, तो वो उसको एक्सेप्ट करेंगे। अदर देन दैट, हमें जो कुरान से मालूम होता है वो ये है कि अल्लाह ताला ने जिनों के अंदर भी रसूल और नबी भेजे हैं। ये एक्सप्लिसिटली मेंशन है कुरान मजीद के अंदर, अलम याती रसूलुम मिनकुम यकुस्सून अलैकुम या माशरल जिन्नि वल इंस अलम यातिकुम रसूलुम मिनकुम, ए जिन्नो इंस के ग्रोह, हमने तुम्हारे अंदर से तुम्हारे रसूल और नबी भेजे। तो
जी
जिससे मालूम होता है कि उनके यहाँ रसूल आए होंगे और उनकी अपनी किताबें होंगी, और नतीजतन ज़ाहिर है उनकी अपनी क़यामत भी होगी। लेकिन ये जो
जी
इश्तराक आप का सवाल कर रहे हैं कि क्या कुरान उनके लिए है, तो ये ऐसे ही है जैसे इजमाली तौर पे कुरान मजीद की वो हिदायत जो कि जिन्हों के लिए भी मौजू है, वो इजमाली लिहाज से उसको एक्सेप्ट करेंगे। लेकिन असल में
जी
जो हमें मालूम होता है वो ये है कि उनके अपने नबी और रसूल आए होंगे, और इससे हम क्यास कर सकते हैं कि उनकी अपनी किताबें भी होंगी। लेकिन जाहिर है उन किताबों में कुछ चीज़ें वो भी होंगी जो मुश्तरक होंगी कुरान से। तो वो चीज़ें जो मुश्तरक हैं कुरान से और उनकी अपनी किताबों में, तो उसके वो मुखातिब तो हैं।
जी जज़ाकल्लाह।
थैंक यू डॉक्टर सलीम। सलमान अजीज साहब, अपना सवाल कर लीजिए आप।
So you told about the Birmingham manuscript, probably, sir. Um, in my opinion, sir, Mustaka Majusi Saab, who has been a landowner for good about a decade, said something about the genetic makeup of the Brits. कि अंग्रेज जो है वो वालदैन के अलावा हर मामर चीज की पूजा करता है. तो in my opinion, sir, the interest of the Western, maybe UK guys, may be only towards the historical side, but not understanding the basic core concept of learning the religion, maybe or guidance from the Quran. Is this the case or not, sir?
I think it's difficult to say for me at this stage, but I can see that, you see, that the important thing is that something has to spark their interest in this new understanding of the Quran. I mean, what we have done in the last 100 years of the Farai school is that a lot of things that have been said and couched in the Arabic language, they have been now they form expression in the English language. So the literature is available. So something has to strike a chord in their hearts to, to earn more attention from this side and study and maybe ask questions, which at the moment I don't find happening for various reasons. But as I said, that we are waiting for opportunities to engage with Western scholars. There have been attempts, some aborted and some successful, but the extent is still not that, I would say, encouraging. And it's just a question of maybe waiting a little more, in which more opportunities, if they arise, we are able to present how the Quran has made its case. And as I said, there are a lot of things that have happened in our own understanding the Quran are due to the fact that because of an over-reliance on Hadith literature in understanding the text of the Quran, that the text itself has gone into oblivion, and it's more the way that you understand it, the text from the Quran through Hadith has become more prominent. And other than that, because of not understanding some of the, I would say, literary nuances of the Quran, we find scholars like A.G. Wells and others saying that the Quran is a cacophony of words. It's a haphazard arrangement of ideas. We don't find things being arranged in a refined form. We find a lot of repetition. So you see, some of the very valid criticism on the Quran that can be made by a person who is not aware of the literary aspect of the Quran, they have found expression in the Western thought, I would say. But as I said, that some inroads still need to be made so that somehow we are able to talk to them, make some of the points that have been raised by the Farai scholars and communicate to them, and then start a healthy dialogue. I think that is the opportunity that is being awaited. And whenever we find that opportunity, inshallah, we will capitalize on it. And we have done in the past. But as I said, because of an overstress on the historicity of the Quran, this side of the Quran is less discussed in the West.
Sir, off-topic question regarding the Gaza, and there was a talk about the Hadith Malahim or Malahim. Could you please tell about that? What are those? They are about the
So
Hadith
these Malahim are like
related to the
wars
army.
that are
Yeah.
wars depicted near the end of time. They are called Malahim, and the singular is Malhama. Malhama means wars, and Malahim, of course, referring to the wars that will take place near the end of time. But I don't know whether you know this or not. Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal has said that there are three things which have absolutely no basis. One of them is these Malahim the Malahim traditions. The other one is the Shan Nazul narratives, and the third are the Tafsir narratives. So he said that there are three types of narratives that you'll find to be absolutely spurious, and amongst them are these Malahims. So this is a whole segment of Hadith and historical literature that needs very, very critical, I would say, review from scholars. And as far as we are concerned at Al-Mawrid, we have this plan to do that. It's yet to, we've yet to start actually. But one of the areas in which historical study is to, to be conducted is these Malahim. And one thing that you might need to know, or might, get to know at this instance, is that a very, very large part of these Malahim consists of spurious literature, and you have to sift out the right from the wrong, and that sifting out process is something that is inshallah on the cards and should start.
Thank you so much for
So
that, Dr.
tafsir
Saleem.
narrative, I couldn't
Salman
understand.
Sahib, I have another question I need to take. Thank you
So
so much.
tafsir
Okay,
narratives
please.
mean narratives which are found in tafsir books regarding the explanation of certain Quranic verses.